Hey guys, it's Brandon. Going to do a vid today on how to checkmate with King and Rook versus Lone King. It's a little bit more, a little trickier, and it takes a little bit more practice than King and Queen versus Lone King. But it's good. It's a good technique to have. It's good to know, and so we'll get to it. The idea is the same as it is with the King and Queen versus Lone King. You want to push the King towards the corner. Any one of these corners is acceptable, but for the purpose of this video, I'm going to push him into the A8 corner over here. And the way you do that is by systematically taking ranks and files from him with your Rook and your King combined. It's easy to do that with the Queen. You can take ranks, files, and diagonals from him as you go down the board, and the King can never approach the Queen to capture the Queen, because he would have to put himself into check to do so. It's not the case with the Rook, because the King can approach from a diagonal to try to capture the Rook. So you have to use your King and your Rook in harmony at times. So the idea is to use the Rook to box the King out. So we can start by taking ranks and files away from him like this. Notice that the King, once I play here to Rook F3, can't come down this way to the third rank, and can't go past the F file. So he's attacking my Rook now. It's defended by the King, but I have to make a move. I don't want the King to. I don't want to give the King any more escape moves, so I can just play my King over here, and we'll see what he decides to do. Okay, so the computer decided to move the King towards the edge of the board. That's always good, because it gives us a chance to take more files away from the King. So you move the Rook over, grab a file. Now the King can't go past the E file. So where is he going to go? It's going up. That's fine. You just keep moving your King and your Rook together and systematically taking files away until you get to a critical position. Okay, so he's moving diagonally here. So we're just going to systematically push our Rook, our defended Rook. Notice the Rook is defended. Taking away now the D file. Now the King can't cross the D file and still can't cross the third rank. So the King goes here. We can't play Rook here to take the fourth rank from him, because it'll get captured. So we just move our King in, make him make a move. So he's playing with the Rook here, keeping it under pressure, but we can move our King and oppose it. Eventually you're going to want your King to oppose the White King in order to deliver the final check, or the Black King, in order to deliver the final checkmate. So if we can get that opposition now, that's perfectly fine. Okay, now he's moved on to the B file, and this is the key position that I want to point out. In all of these checkmates, you want your Rook to stay on either the C file or the F file, so the third one away from the edge of the board, and you'll see why that's important later on. It never goes to the second or first rank, depending on which side of the second or first file from the edge, depending on which edge you're pushing him to. You want your Rook here on that third file away. So he brought his King closer. Now we want to oppose the King. Remember, we're still guarding the Rook, but we're opposing the King. So notice now the King has no squares to go to, except to either go to A4 here or to get pushed back onto the fifth rank here. And the closer and closer we push him into the corner, the closer and closer he gets to being checkmated. So we'll see. So the computer decides to go back one square here. That's fine. You just bring your King closer and closer. You see how we're systematically taking squares away from him. Same thing as we had before now. He can only go either to A5 or back to A6 or B6. So he chooses to go A6. Okay, so this is a position which I want you guys to pay attention to. When the King is on the edge of the board and your King is on the second file away from the board, and there's one square in between them, and your Rook is on the third rank, in order to push the King back, you play Rook check. Rook check means that he has only two squares to go to. He can't come down to the fourth rank here because the King guards it. He can't go to B5 because the Rook is there. So he can only go to either A6 or B6. Let's see. So he decides to go to A6. So now we can just walk the king closer, and we're pushing him closer and closer to the corner of the board where we'll deliver the final checkmate. Here's another example. Here's an example where you're going to have to play a waiting move. Sometimes when you get into positions like this with the rook and the king, checkmating the lone king, you have to play a waiting move, which means a move where you're not sort of not advancing in your position. You're just playing a move to sort of give the king time to put himself into a worse place, because we can't play check on c6. If we play check onto c6, the king takes the rook. And if we play check on b5, the king starts to escape this way on the board, and we don't want that to happen. We want him to stay in his box here. So what we do in this circumstance is play a waiting move. It can be rook anywhere, really, as long as it's behind the king in this direction here. But we'll just play rook here for the sake of argument. Now the king can only go to either the square a6 or a7 or b7. If he goes to the square a6, we have that situation, that setup that I told you before, where the king is on the edge of the board, and your king is on the second file away from the edge, and there's one file between you. So if he decides to go to the edge of the board, let's see, like that, yep. Now we play rook check. Remember this is all made possible because of that waiting move we played. And the king can only go either here to a7 or to a6 or to b7. So we'll see. So he goes to a7. Now we can bring the king in. And if he plays this move again, where the king is opposite the other king, the kings are opposing, and this king is attacking your rook here, we play this waiting move. Now the king again has only three choices: a7, b8, or a8. So, okay, he decides to go to b7, in which case the king again is on the edge of the board. Your king is on the one file away from the edge, and there's one rank between you two. So you bring the rook here, check. Same pattern. Bring the king up. King has only one square to go to now, which is b7. And notice he's in the corner, and he's got only this one square to go to, b7, which he will. Now you have to play one more waiting move, just like we did before. We're going to see how the king is opposite the other king, attacking the rook here. So you just play one waiting move. Now the king has only one square left to go to, which is the a8 square. So that's where he'll go, in which case you get to deliver your mate. So we followed the same pattern all the way up the board, except the only thing is, once that pattern reaches the very edge where the king has nowhere to go up, it's checkmate. The king has nowhere to go. So we'll start. I'll start that from the beginning and just sort of go through it again real quick. We have king and lone rook checkmate. So the idea is just to sort of use the king and rook together to systematically take squares from the king, box him out. You want to push the king towards the edge of the board as much as possible. And remember, you can't overextend your rook too much, because king can always attack him from the diagonal, so you have to sort of use your king and rook together. Get the king in opposite if you have to. If he goes back, then you just systematically take stuff from him. Remember, we're trying to get our king and our rook into a position where the rook is here on the third rank, or the third file away from where you're going to corner you're pushing the king into. And then from there, the idea is to just get the king opposite the other king. And now we have this position here where we have the king on the edge of the board, on the first file, or the A file, and your king is on the B file, and there's one rank away from them, so we get to play this check. King has to go back. If he goes back here, you push the king forward. If he goes back there, you also push the king forward. Now he has can only either go back or up or to the side. If he goes to the side, you get the same thing, check. And if he goes back this time, you just push the king forward. Now we have this position again where you have king opposite each other and attacking the rook and guarding the rook. You have to play a waiting move. Remember, you can even be down here, but just for simplicity, we'll go here. So the king has only 2 squares to go to, either a7 or 3 squares, a7, a8, or b8. If he goes to b8, you can bring your king up. Now he has only a7 and then mate. So using those patterns, remember to get the rook onto the c file or the f file if you want to push him into this corner. The king on the second rank, or excuse me, on the b file or the g file if you're going to do it in this corner, and just slowly push him up using that pattern until you want this final position here where you can deliver mate. So hopefully that was helpful, and we'll see you guys next time.